Senator McConnell, thank you so much for joining us here at the end of the Republican Convention. It's been a long week for your party, but there's one big piece we have yet to hear tonight, which is Mitt Romney's acceptance speech. And I'm wondering what you're expecting to hear from him, or more importantly, for you as a Republican leader, what do you hope he does, and how can he help your party with this speech?
Well, I think winning the election is a three-step process. Number one, people have to feel that the current crowd didn't do a very good job. I think the surveys indicate that's the case. Number two, people need to know, what the nominees for president and vice president are like, sort of a biography. I think we learned a lot about Mitt Romney from Ann Romney the other night, and we learned a lot about Paul Ryan from Paul Ryan himself last night. So what I anticipate tonight is the final part of any ultimate sale, which is where would you take the country? You're dissatisfied with the current crowd. I've told you who I am and how I lived my life, and now let me tell you where I think the country ought to go. So I anticipate tonight Governor Romney's going to lay out the different direction that we believe the country ought to take. He's spent his life fixing things. If ever there were a country that needed fixing, it's ours, and it's now.
There have been some complaints that on the policy front that the Romney campaign so far hasn't been very specific about where it would take the country. You can't make that up in one speech. Have you been feeling like it's been a little lacking in that respect?
Well, a campaign rolls out in phases. There's still plenty of time between now and the first Tuesday in November to talk about where he would take the country. So no, I don't think a whole lot needed necessarily to be done earlier. But we're beginning to talk about pretty specific things. I mean, repealing Obamacare, putting that $760 billion back in Medicare, which adversely affects today's seniors, and talking about how we would save the entitlement programs for today's seniors' children and grandchildren. That's pretty specific stuff, and much of it, has been subject to demagoguery over the years. I'm reminded of the ad last year that showed a guy that looked like Paul Ryan pushing a little old lady in a wheelchair up to the cliff and throwing her over. But we understand the Democrats are not interested in having an adult conversation with the American people. We're going to have it anyway because the country now has a debt the size of its economy, which makes us look a lot like Greece, not some other day, but now. We've had 4 straight years of annual deficits of $1 trillion or more. This country needs to go in a different direction, and I think they're yearning for someone to tell us how to do that.
What do you think is the biggest obstacle to Mitt Romney winning in the fall?
Well, I think the president's a skillful politician. I'm hoping he can't convince the American people that it's not his fault that we're doing as poorly as we are, but that's really his unofficial campaign slogan. It's not my fault. It was the tsunami in Japan, the debt crisis in Europe, rich people, Wall Street, Republicans, George Bush, and by the way, Mitt Romney's Gordon Gekko. Now that has nothing to do with anything other than trying to run down your opponent and divide the American people, pit one group against another, and hopefully somehow out of all of that confusion get to 51% of the vote. That's a strategy they're employing because I think their campaign consultants have told them, Mr. President, you can't win on your record. People don't like what you've done. You've got to make this election about something else. And so that's why the It's Not My Fault campaign has been in full sway. I hope it's not going to work. Pitting one set of Americans against another has occasionally worked, but not always. And we hope that the American people don't believe that this kind of these ad hominem attacks on our candidates and engaging in really not accepting responsibility for anything you've done, we are hopeful that the American people are not going to buy that.
Let me ask you a little bit about the Senate elections, kind of right in your backyard. Republicans have been hoping to pick up the 4 seats you need to have the majority. Big setback for you in Missouri that you've had this controversy around the Republican candidate there. Do you think you can still win the majority if you don't win Missouri, which it now looks like you won't?
The first thing I would say about Missouri is the final chapter may not have been written yet in Missouri. But if things were to stay the same as they are, that would be a big setback. Having said that, there are lots of seats up this year. 10 Republican, 23 Democrats. I don't believe we're going to lose a single seat that we currently have. We have 2 incumbents with spirited races, Scott Brown and Dean Heller. Massachusetts and Nevada, I don't think either one of them will lose, which means we're on offense in a whole lot of places.
It does seem like your chances of getting to a majority are, the odds are longer than they seemed at least a year ago.
Well, I still think it's about 50-50. You know, I've characterized it as 50-50 for the last few months. I still view it that way. So, you know, we're not happy about the situation in Missouri, but I'm really happy about the situation in Wisconsin. But Florida, we weren't sure at all was going to be competitive. It is. Never anticipated we'd be in the game in Connecticut. So it's, you know, all these pieces of the puzzle are moving around, and somehow in all of that, as you suggested at the outset, we have to net 4 in order to have a slim majority.
And then you get to be majority leader.